Picture this. You've just speared the biggest antelope of your life. It's twice the size of anything you've brought home in months, meat enough to feed your whole camp for a week, and you're walking back into camp with your chest a little puffed out, waiting for the applause. You don't get applause, you get roasted, literally and figuratively. Someone squints at your kill and says, more or less, that's it? I've seen bigger. There's no Instagram to post the trophy shot on. No group chat to brag in. Just 20 or 30 people staring at the biggest catch you've ever made, actively pretending it's mediocre. That's not an insult. That's medicine. And by the end of this video, you'll never look at a compliment, or the pointed lack of one, the same way again. So here's the question we're actually chasing today. Did ancient humans get jealous? And the answer is yes, predictably, powerfully so. And your ancestors built entire social systems just to keep that jealousy from tearing the group apart. Let's set the stage. For roughly 95% of the time our species has existed, we lived in small, mobile hunter-gatherer bands, maybe 20 to 50 people, related by blood or marriage, dependent on each other for everything: food, defense, childcare, information. In a group that small, there is no anonymity. Everyone sees everything. Everyone knows exactly who's getting more meat, more attention, more status, and more romantic interest than everyone else. There's nowhere to hide a grudge. Jealousy, at its root, isn't a personality flaw. It's an alarm system. The evolutionary psychologist David Buss has spent decades studying it, and his research suggests jealousy evolved because it solved real survival problems, mainly keeping your mate, your resources, and your social standing from being quietly taken by somebody else. Buss found a strange, consistent split that holds up across wildly different cultures. Men tend to report more distress imagining sexual infidelity, while women tend to report more distress imagining emotional infidelity. A partner falling in love with someone else, even without anything physical happening. Different flavors of threat, same underlying wiring. Don't lose what's yours. Now here's where it gets interesting. If jealousy is that old and that universal, hunter-gatherer societies had a serious problem on their hands. Because jealousy doesn't just protect you, it also makes you dangerous. A camp with one guy who thinks he's the greatest hunter alive, and won't stop reminding everyone, is a camp one bad night away from a fight, a festering grudge, or somebody sneaking off with your spouse purely out of spite. So what do you do about a man with a very large ego and a very sharp spear? You humble him before he gets the chance to become insufferable. This is where Richard Lee comes in. Lee was an anthropologist who lived with the Juhohansi-san of the Kalahari through the 1960s, and he documented a custom that sounds almost cruel until you understand exactly what it's doing. They called it insulting the meat. A hunter comes home with a massive kill, and instead of praise, he gets mocked. You call that meat? I wouldn't even bother carrying that home. Lee actually asked one of the hunters why they did this, and the man's answer has become famous in anthropology for a reason. He said that when a young man kills too much, he starts to think of himself as a chief, and starts to think of everyone else as his servants, so they always talk about his meat as worthless. That way, they cool his heart and keep him gentle. Let that sink in. An entire ritual, refined and passed down across generations, whose only job is to stop pride from curdling into arrogance, and arrogance from curdling into jealousy and violence. And it's not just the San. Polly Wiesner, who has spent years studying meat sharing and social dynamics among the Juho Thi, documented how arguments over the fair distribution of a kill functioned as a kind of pressure valve, letting resentment out in words instead of letting it build up silently until somebody did something you couldn't take back. The anthropologist Christopher Boehm went even further, comparing hunter-gatherer societies across the globe, from Africa to the Arctic, and found the same basic pattern showing up again and again: mocking, gossip, ridicule, even temporary exile for anyone who got too big for their boots. Boehm calls it a reverse dominance hierarchy. Instead of one alpha lording over everyone, the way you'd see in a chimpanzee troop, the entire group actively teams up to keep any single person from rising too far above the rest. Think of it as the world's oldest tall poppy syndrome, except the poppies could genuinely starve you out of camp for getting cocky. Let's talk about the other kind of jealousy, the one over people, not meat. Frank Marlowe, who studied the Hadza of Tanzania, one of the last groups on Earth still living substantially by hunting and gathering, found something that complicates the picture in a good way. Mate guarding, the jealous hovering evolutionary theory would predict, was actually fairly low intensity among the Hadza compared to farming societies. Divorce and remarriage happened relatively easily and without huge social fallout. Marlowe's explanation is that Hadza women weren't economically trapped. They gathered their own food, they could walk away from a bad relationship, and they'd survive just fine on their own terms. Jealousy, it turns out, isn't purely about biology. It's also about leverage. Take away someone's ability to simply leave, and jealousy tends to sharpen, curdling into control. Give them a real exit, and it softens. I want to be careful here, because it's tempting to romanticize all of this into ancient people had it all figured out. They didn't. There's real evidence of violence tied to jealousy and mate competition scattered through the archaeological and ethnographic record. This isn't a fairy tale where nobody ever got hurt. What's genuinely remarkable isn't that jealousy failed to exist. It's that these societies built deliberate cultural technology to manage an emotion they clearly understood was dangerous, thousands of years before anyone had the phrase emotional regulation. There's a warmer angle here too. Helen Fisher, who has spent her career studying the biology of romantic love, points out that humans evolved as a largely pair-bonding species, but a flexible one, prone to what she calls serial monogamy, rather than one lifelong lock. That flexibility meant jealousy had to be constantly managed rather than permanently switched off, a running negotiation instead of a single settled rule, generation after generation. Let's pause and address the skeptic in the room, because you should be asking this. How much of this can we really project onto humans 50,000 or 100,000 years ago versus the specific 20th century groups anthropologists happen to study? Fair question, and an honest one. We can't put a Paleolithic hunter on a therapist's couch and ask him how he's feeling. But the logic holds up from several directions at once. The consistency of jealousy as an emotion across totally unconnected cultures, leveling mechanisms popping up independently from the Kalahari to the Arctic, with no contact between the groups, and Sarah Blaffer-Hurdy's work on what she calls cooperative breeding, where hunter-gatherer children were raised not only by parents, but by a whole web of alloparents, grandmothers, aunts, older siblings, spreading out both the labor of childcare and, crucially, the sheer possessiveness that usually comes bundled with it. When an entire camp has a hand in raising a child, there's less territorial mind energy circulating through daily life, in parenting, and by extension, in plenty of other relationships too. So circle back to that antelope. You walk into camp with the best kill of your life, and instead of a parade, you get mocked for it. It stings for a second, but it isn't an accident, and it isn't casual cruelty. It's thousands of years of trial and error, distilled down into a joke, engineered to keep one man's ego from becoming the entire group's problem. Which brings us back to you. Actually, scrolling your phone tonight. Somebody posts a new house, a new relationship, a new promotion, and something small and ugly twists in your stomach. That twist is ancient. It's the same alarm system that once told a Juho-Hansi hunter's campmates to knock him down a peg before his pride turned into a genuine threat. The difference is, nobody's standing next to you anymore to insult your meat and cool your heart. You're on your own, running Ice Age software on a phone that never once lets the comparison stop scrolling. So next time that pang of jealousy hits over someone else's highlight reel, remember this. Your ancestors felt exactly the same twist in the gut, and they built entire cultures just to keep it from running the show. You might want to consider building a few boundaries of your own.